Decoration behind me.
Okay, we are live. It is Thursday, September 17th, 2015, 11 a.m. Pacific, and this is DB Hangops. My name is Jeffrey Anderson. I'm a DBA at Box, and today we're going to be talking about growing your team and just kind of like high level, that as a theme, high level, what are your hiring criteria, skills that you kind of look for, onboarding for success, and advice for people who want to become DBAs. And then probably the second half, or we'll see where we get, is just kind of talking about new technologies and things you've used, new tech, new hot stuff, whether or not it's MySQL or database related. Just kind of curious, are there things that people should keep their eyes on coming up on the horizon? So without further ado, let's do a quick round of introductions. Do you want to start us off, Pim?
Sure. My name is Pim van der Wal. I'm a DBA at Acquia.
Okay, Shlomi.
Hi, I'm Shlomi. I'm engineer at Booking.com, and I'll leave in just a moment to bring 2 beers from which Pim can choose.
And Vincent.
I'm Vincent Janelle. I am an infrastructure engineer at Lookout.com.
Okay, cool. So, Shlomi, I guess you want to go grab your 2 beers.
That feels so important now.
I mean, if he's here every time we do this, we could start every DB Hangops with this.
Works for me. Well, actually, until the point where I realize I might need some beer at that time as well, but I'm in a different time zone, so.
It's okay. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, so don't worry about
it.
There you go. But I guess, yeah, while we're waiting, so again, yeah, so today's high-level theme is growing your team, and so this is actually, we talked to a wide array of different team sizes here. We've talked to Sylvia previously, and she's at SendGrid right now, and she's the only DBA there. Pim, I think it's just you and Emily, right?
Pretty much. Well, Emily recently said we have 2.3 DBAs. We got somebody who's partially, but yes, that's about it.
Got it. And then yeah, for my group, we have 9 people now. And so I'd love to hear like what everyone else's team size look like and kind of where we are. But I guess before we dive into that, Shlomi's back, so.
So yeah, we have like 5 or 6 DBAs. It's difficult to define. Like some of them are like half sysadmins or cross-continent or about to leave or about to arrive. So it's about 5 or 6 DBAs.
Okay. I vote the Who Garden, personally.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no choice there. You got to go with the Who Garden. Of course, knowing Shlomi.
Which means I'm going to go for
exactly.
this. I'm going
So yeah, Vincent, how about we're at your space? Are you like the only MySQL person there right now, or?
There's 3 people that act sort of as authoritative people, and then a smattering of the SREs can handle individual tasks without asking questions. Things like rebuilding servers or just general routine administration tasks that aren't automated.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, I mean, so it sounds like we've got a pretty good mix here, actually. The only thing we're missing, like I wish Sylvia could have made it today so we could have like the lone perspective, but Vincent, it sounds like you guys are kind of. There are some people who know more about it than others, and there's not like a DBA per se, but everyone kind of does it. Is that?
No, well, we have people who are classified specifically just for doing database work. So I do Portland MySQL. I also do Postgres, Cassandra, and a bunch of other things. My team itself is responsible for the database tiers. So we have to be cross-platform. So I don't label myself as a MySQL DBA.
Okay, cool. And it looks like Sylvia magically appeared as I am wishing for her to show up. I don't know if she. There we go.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Sorry. Keyboard failed. Yeah, I know. You say much of my name, you just magically appear.
Yeah. So yeah, and Sylvia, I mean, do you want to maybe just, because you are the DBA for SendGrid right now, is that correct?
Not anymore.
Whoa, whoa.
Whoa,
Okay.
whoa. Yeah. She's barely getting her feet into things, and she's busy with HR stuff right now. And once things are settled down, I'm gonna try to return, maybe have her come join us at some point. But
Cool.
yeah, our second DBA just started this week, so yay!
And
Okay.
this must be the only company in the world with 100% women DBA.
I know. I'm very
That's
proud of that.
pretty awesome. So I guess that allows us to kind of roll into the next thing, which is first question is like, what's your hiring criteria? When you're interviewing people, or when like there are candidates coming through the pipeline that you want to talk to about bringing onto your team or group, what are you looking for? And this will range from things like, is it an internal hire? So what are kind of the steps you're going to lay out maybe, versus is an external hire? What's just like they need to know it cold and be able to do it, versus what can they grow into?
So typically when we look for new DBAs, we're looking for experienced ones. This is the typical situation because, and we are looking, there's always an open slot, right? And we have a lot of work. So hopefully we can get more experienced people. And other than testing to see whether you know how to do, I don't know, backups and alter tables, etc. We really want to see someone who understands production, like systems, who understands, what it takes, what are the problems of working at a place that shouldn't go down. There's no 4-hour maintenance window per week, right? So this is something we're looking to, just does the person understand what it takes to make a system up at all times? That's the number one criteria, I think.
Okay. And I mean, does that echo? I mean, that resounds for me perfectly. Like if we're looking for someone who's seasoned or has done this before, like I almost want to call it operational or production sensibilities. Can you execute on something that needs to be done? Can you ensure that a change that needs to go through does go through? And balancing the risk there. Like there are some things that be super super safe when you do them. Other ones where it's like, just roll with it. If something breaks, roll it back.
Well, there's a little bit of difference in how you define your role, or actually what the company does. So we're platform as a service, which means that we're responsible for the databases that we run for the customers, but we automated most of the tasks that we need to do on those. But we're not, in most cases, I'm not going to say we're not responsible for keeping them up all the time, but if they put some bad code in production, then we have no control over that. They can cause their own downtime, at which point there's a limited amount of things that we can do. So given all of that, our requirements are a little bit different. We haven't hired another DBA. We're a team of 2 DBAs, and I think if we hire people, we hire them to be partially operations, but also, I would say at least 50% to be part of the engineering team to develop new automation. So those would be more requirements for us than people who can keep stuff up and running 100% of the time. Not saying that we're not trying to do that, but it's a slightly different perspective.
Okay, and Vincent, Sylvia, how about for you guys?
I'm relatively new at this company, so I talk about my interview experience, which was mostly around systems and operations. I wasn't really hired for the DBA stuff. And then one of the interview topics, they went through my resume and they're like, "Oh, what do you know about MySQL?" And so talked about it, and then talked about basic scaffolding and stuff like that, like just making sure that I'm not actually lying about it. And I would probably, if I had to interview someone for this specific role again, I would most likely not challenge them with stupid things, but ask them about administration tasks like, online schema changes and stuff like that. How would you go about addressing it? And just general good practices. Internally, we seem to sort of identify people that are good at the task and then promoting them up.
And Sylvia?
Let's see. So I've had to do quite a few interviews before we finally filled out that position. So I think the biggest stuff that I had focused on during the hiring has been more than the standard MySQL tasks, and has been a lot more about how much automation have you done, how much configuration management has been done, things like that, which is probably part of why there wasn't a lot of it took a long time to basically get someone, in part because we also need someone who has done MySQL at large scale. So we couldn't really, we needed someone who didn't just, we're much bigger as far as our scale and how many databases we run and the complexity of some of our clusters, that it has to be someone who has already done the operations part and has now only been DBA for a while and has already brought the distributed system mindset to managing MySQL, which seems like for some reason those two things have not converged yet. I'll be honest, I learned to put those two together at SegWit. Like, I didn't come in with a distributed system mindset either. So yeah, it has to be like systems of scale, and while understanding that the title is DBA and the primary concern is the databases, to still also have an architectural view of things, where if it sometimes makes things a little more complex in the database, to understand the trade-offs there and be okay with them.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
For a while, it seemed very hard to find, like, I'd call them sort of like system DBAs. This was, 10-something years ago, where if you were an Oracle admin, you could double or triple your salary by having some Unix knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what I wanted to, that's part of the reason this actually was such an interesting topic to just kind of discuss, because, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, my team, like, we've effectively doubled in size over the past 6 months, and, I mean, but for the longest time, we were only 3 or 4 people. We got, 3 to 5 people, and it was kind of really challenging to find someone who had the full kind of stack of knowledge that we really needed, because for bringing experienced people in, we want, obviously you've worked with, like Sylvia said, effectively distributed systems. You've worked with a large amount of infrastructure, just a lot of instances potentially, and just have some operational sensibilities around that, while also being able to really deep dive on some weird things that could happen, down into like the operating system level potentially. I mean, one of my favorite interview questions, and I wrapped this into my Percona presentation this past year, was, do you know that you can go down and on a Linux box at least, you can strace, you can use GDB, and you can maybe get into the guts of the server to figure out what's going on potentially. Even if it's not necessarily a bug in the database, maybe it's a poor application interaction, but being able to definitively find that because it's impacting you. And so likewise, we also were able to hire a junior member internally, and that's like another kind of path we have of being able to identify people internally who maybe are interested in managing data stores or distributed systems at scale. And how do we, one, get them interested? And obviously some of them just might be just straight up interested in or looking at it. But then once you've got someone like that, what's the roadmap you lay out to help them grow into the role? So maybe someone has some very good sysadmin experience. How do you get them ramped up on managing multiple databases across the infrastructure? And so that's actually like the next thing that I'm more curious about. Sylvia, you've recently hired somebody. Like, what's the plan for when you bring a new person in? How do you ramp them? How do you get them to touch all the different pieces they need to know?
That actually brings up that's a good question, because it brings up something else that I was looking for that I forgot to mention. Is it was very, very important for me to find someone who could easily interface with engineers, both senior and not yet senior engineers, and to mentor them and show them where certain application design paradigms can be really harmful down the line. It's important to know that the DBA doesn't really control everything. That there's a lot of times where we'll have issues, and it's the application layer who's basically dealing with the database in a manner that isn't very efficient. And it's important to have a DBA who can easily explain these things and basically get the application fixes that are necessary so that the entire stack is more reliable without just absorbing pain on the data store side and making things more complex unnecessarily.
I'm sure you got a single yes/no question to ascertain that, right?
Nice. Yeah. It was, I don't know, it was a little disheartening how a lot of candidates that came my way beforehand did not seem interested in that very much. And I think it's a big part of thinking that the DBA task is just, I want to make sure the backups are running, I want to make sure, there's a query sniper, like the standard stuff, which is all fine and nice, but, again, distributed systems, you're going to have to basically step back and go, it's client and server, and I have to know what the client is doing and not just pretend it's a black box. As far as ramping up, I think actually what we're planning to do, so next week I'm going to be in one of our offices, and she's going to meet me there for a couple of days too. And I think what we're planning to do is basically have start having Madeline deal with tasks that are like schema changes and chef cookbook changes, but basically use those as a way to get her familiar with our stack, with what our application does. We have a pretty complex stack. We have multiple parts that are being rewritten in all sorts of different stages, and so there's definitely a lot to get familiar with as far as like how each of those parts work. What is the application like in that particular area? What are the different clusters? What are the applications that span multiple clusters? So it's gonna be definitely for a bit, at least at first, like that interfacing with engineers, along with engineering managers and the design process of all sorts of different new features that are in the pipeline. So I think once that's done, she and I can start splitting up the task of, what are the parts that are very operational related that need to be optimized, like automation things that we need to do, things like that, versus, architectural discussions that we need a DBA involved in early on that I might have not been dropping in the past because of lack of time and stuff like that. So, but yeah, definitely start with getting the DBA familiar with the application stack. It might seem counterintuitive sometimes. I know in past shops that doesn't seem very important. It's like, why would the DBA need to know all that stuff? But it's actually super important.
And I was going to chime in similarly. Like one of the things we do when we bring a new DBA in is the first day is getting all their access set up and stuff. And typically within like the first day or two, we really want them to get their hands into Puppet, get their access set up in the production environment, and the other key one is get their user grant on all the database infrastructure pushed out, hopefully within the first day or two, so they can start being successful going in and through that first week. And then likewise, getting knowledgeable about the stack. And so that's the other big one is we have a architecture kind of overview that we do. And so there's a high-level architecture overview that's done by the Site Reliability Group. But then we also have here's the database architecture. So all these things are going to talk to us. You're probably not going to know what all of them are. You just need to know that here is like the application database, and this is where the company started, kind of thing. Here are the data stores that store log events or something like that, and just being able to go through here's the sharded environment and how that looks and how that works. And I mean every company has something like that. Like I'm just thinking like Shlomi at Booking, when you show us those replication topologies where there's looks like hundreds of slaves under some topology, and it's like just being able to describe that to somebody like, oh yeah, here is the primary cluster that does the stuff, and but there's like 7 layers of replication down, and just trying to grasp which one's important or not, or are there different guarantees, and how much as a DBA, how much do you care about them going up and down those parts of the topology, and then obviously things like automation, the tools that you have in place, how are backups done? Do you have some cool backup solution you've written? Do you just have a cron that runs MySQL dump? How do you restore things? And I think the key thing, and it's one of those, it's an easy thing for people to say oh yeah, go read the documentation, and if anything's wrong, update it. And that's usually the first thing we say to every new hire. And I imagine everyone kind of grinned a little bit that I feel like that's what is said to every new hire, if documentation's out of date, please fix it. And that gets a little exhausting after a while, but being able to identify like, oh wow, some of the documentation we have could be so horrifically out of date that we need to focus on it. And so part of the phrase of like onboarding for success is like when you have these people come in, have kind of a living document of like the checklist they need to do to get started. And then as they're going through it, if they find problems, like you can ask them to fix it, but they might not have enough context yet, so maybe you diving in and fixing it as well. That's a very long-winded answer on my part.
I have a small confession since you asked. I still don't feel that I really know. I don't even know that I know most of the topologies and why exactly they're there. Or, there's with Booking, it's a large organization, and when you join in, there's an organized onboarding, so a lot of intros by a lot of technical guys, and there's this guy who's like principal developer who's been here for like forever. He's giving you the application stack, right? He takes a whiteboard and he starts drawing the diagram of what talks to what and how the data flows, etc. And it's not ending. And his writing becomes smaller and smaller. And he says, "Well, last year when I drew this, I didn't have all those components. And to be honest, I'm not sure I know all the components today." So people lose track. I'm not sure there's one person that really has the entire picture. Maybe there are like a couple people like that. So so this is one problem. On the other hand, because it's such a large organization, you don't. It's not like you're the second DBA and everyone does everything, so you should pick up on everything, etc. So you can start slowly. So you can join. You can just join tickets day and do tickets for a couple of weeks, and most of the tickets are the normal. I want to add a column here. I want to add a user or a pool, etc. So it's a bit repetitive, but you get the hang of it. So you start by doing those chores, right? And by that you get the initial push into what it is. And slowly, really slowly, for me, I do so much of a backend that I'm not entirely familiar with. I'm familiar with the most important application side stuff, but I can't do the whiteboard thing. It's impossible for me.
Okay, and we had someone new just pop in. Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? Make sure to unmute before you do.
Yeah, I'm Patrick King. I'm a database administrator at Pandora Internet Radio. I've been hanging out with all of you in DB chat for a while now and decided to join Hangouts. So, cool. And I thought this was an interesting topic to talk about hiring because as a Postgres database administrator, I have an impossible time finding people to work with. And so I thought this would be interesting to talk about.
Well, so just from what you've been listening to so far, I'm curious from your perspective, like what, if you're bringing in a new person, what's probably the biggest challenge, or like what are the things you do to make them successful when they start?
So I've actually had the biggest luck hiring junior database administrators, finding people that have a little bit of systems knowledge and like maybe a little bit of either like MySQL or Oracle knowledge, like just enough to be dangerous, and then basically curating them into the role that I need them to be in. It sounds a little devious and underhanded, but it works. I've gotten 3 really good database administrators out of that process at 3 different companies, and now all 3 of them have been very successfully took over after I left, and it's been real great. For hiring other seniors that work along with me, I guess the biggest thing I look for is really, how Postgres internals knowledge. I know that's like what everyone's like, well, you have to know about the database, but compared to other databases, I mean, I always talk about how Postgres has this really weird niggles, like really weird specific things you have to know about, and that's what I look for to see if they have had that experience to know the difference between Postgres and other RDBMSs.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. Regardless of technology stack that you're running, like if we're for us again, like if we're hiring someone who's experienced, if they have a deep understanding of MySQL or the internals, easy variables that you should just like the settings that you should have for them in a production environment, those are always good. And then like if we start going down the route of, in our situation, looking for someone who has HBase experience, understanding how all the components interact there and work, understanding some of the race conditions that can happen and ways that the system tolerates those and how it deals with the applications. So definitely. But yeah, so I actually lost track of where we were, but I think, Pim, I was going to ask about, if for onboarding from your perspective.
Well, since we got 2 DBAs and I'm the last one that got on board, and at that point I was officially the first DBA. Emily switched over later. Haven't really done any DBA onboarding here. I mean, the onboarding here is either for the rest of the operations team, and the same goes as what you're saying. I mean, you try to tell them what the whole stack is to kind of make them understand that, and then try to set them up to get going for, well, I'm not going to say tutorials, but just get them started as quickly as possible. But that doesn't really apply to what we would do as DBAs. So sorry, I don't think I can be of much use here.
Well, fine.
Sorry. Told you I was filler.
So okay, I guess this brings me to the next thing though. So Patrick had mentioned growing junior members into a role and being able to kind of work from there. And so I guess I'd like to hear from everybody. What advice would you give to effectively a new DBA, whether it's a new seasoned person coming into your team or someone that you're growing into your team?
Read a lot. There's a lot of really good blog posts out there about scaling MySQL. Like just in the last quarter, there was the one that Sam, I think, posted. Like Sam Lambert at GitHub, his slides from all his talks are available online. There was one from Pinterest. There's a lot of things about scaling MySQL and managing MySQL at large scale that are not in the documentation. So maybe step 0 is get familiar with MySQL admin, with Percona tools, with like how to do backups, those kind of things. That's the standard stuff. But if the intent is to truly like continue with that and do a larger scale, you're gonna have to learn the caveats. Like one of the first things that I had seen very few engineers actually know about is, hey, if you're gonna be sharding in the future, and if you want to really do HA really well, don't let MySQL generate IDs for you. And a lot of people are surprised by that advice, but it seems to be very good advice for companies like Etsy and before them Flickr, and I believe Pinterest is the same way too. There are things that might not be in the documentation that would be very, very useful to know if you're going to be actually managing more than just a few servers in production. So I think reading is very, very important.
I would say that the one thing is not to confine yourself to a single topic. I mean, we talked about we want people who know more about sysadmin stuff, who can be a developer. I mean, if I'm looking for somebody, I want somebody who's able to dig into whatever it is. If you don't know about it, figure it out and try to learn from it. Don't confine yourself saying, hey, this is not on a database, I don't want to know. Always want to know more about, dig in deeper. I mean, that goes for any, I mean, if you start out as a developer, hey, you want to learn about database and systems as well. So, in my opinion, somebody who digs into everything can be any role that he or she wants to be.
Yeah, I guess one like classic advice that you could give, which applies to everyone, but it's really hard to put to practice, is that just because things are as they are, okay, you can begin with that, but that doesn't mean that they're supposed to be like that, or that it's good that they are like that. So if it's broken, fix it. just consider fixing stuff, not just accepting them as they are. It's a bit presumptuous to tell that to a new guy or a new DBA, but hopefully it's a good approach.
Well, the first month you get to question everything put in front of you, right? That's why people come up to you in the first month and go, "Hey, you should ask this."
Yeah, well, a lot of companies say we want our employees to question us to innovate, but you cannot, in practice, do that all the time. If you have this new person who's only questioning you and saying, "Well, why is it like that?" Eventually you're going to say, "It is like that because it is like that."
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But we can't fix everything, right? So find a few things that you can fix. That would be nice at the beginning.
For the people that are looking to become DBAs, the only things that I can really suggest are to find out where the backups are, if there are any. Test them if they're not being tested, and to assume that any non-impacting changes will actually impact something.
I'm dying at that last one. I'm writing like all that down verbatim right now. Find out where the backups are. Test them if they're not tested.
Careful. That means you get put in charge of the backups.
That's usually what that means.
Wait, that's why we hired a DBA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they can unpack the backup on the production master. Yay! You told us to test the backups.
So what I actually did, along with the like to torture my juniors, is all 3 shops that I hired juniors at didn't have really good documentation, and I was firefighting the whole time, so I used as an excuse to not write documentation. So the first thing I did was have them write documentation about the whole environment, or start to do it. So it got them like the whole, like they got the lay of the land for everything, and it goes along with the backups. Like if it's not there, just do it. And it in my opinion, it worked out really well for documentation wise and for them learning. So.
Yeah, and I think basically +1 on what everyone has said today, and the last one is kind of along the same vein of what Shalom was saying, but don't be afraid to challenge the norm or the assumptions in the environment. I mean, obviously, some things are the way they are for some reason, potentially historical or not, and maybe there's a reason you don't change something. But the flip side is, if something looks broken, like, ask why. And if, because I think that's been the most interesting thing for me with having new folks come into our team recently of, they're coming from different companies, some that they've done consulting at a lot of places, or they worked in a very large infrastructure, larger than what we have, and then they'd come in and be like, why is it this way? And it's like, I don't have a good answer for that. It's just the way it is. We should fix that. We should change it. And I think the last little piece of advice too is don't be afraid to talk, find people and talk to them. And I mean, this depends on every company and the size of the company, but I think we'd mentioned earlier, know the full stack and have potentially have a good relationship with your engineering team. And I would say go a step further, have a good relationship with any team or group. I mean, obviously, as a database person, you really want to work with the people who write the clients that talk to you in your systems. But find other teams in the operations group. Find ways to kind of basically just cross, fill the gaps between all the teams and help get everyone just to kind of jazzed about it and working together. I mean, it's great. There's a network problem. You have that person on the network team that you can just kind of float that by quickly, and they can prove you wrong, or vice versa, or they can show you kind of what Pim was saying. They can show you maybe a thing you need to dig deeper. So overall, just don't be afraid to reach out and look at other stuff. Don't be shy to look at other people's code. Don't be shy to comment on other people's code reviews, things like that. Just kind of go to town. So don't be,
I fully agree with that. I mean, definitely talk to a lot of people. There's too many people who just sit in their cubicle and kind of don't want to reach out. So absolutely talk to people. At the same time, you need to have the right culture for that. I think in most places that's perfectly fine. People love talking about the stuff that they do. So.
Yeah, speaking of culture, I think that was one of the things that helped me the most, at least currently at SendGrid. We are completely open to people reviewing each other's work, and not just within engineering. I was just thinking while Jeffrey was saying, hey, about making friends, make friends with the finance team. One of the things that surprised me that I had learned here, was basically getting in sync with the finance team and understanding how they view the ops stack and the ops expenses, and what are the things we spend the money on and why, and their effect on the business side of revenue and stuff like that. And it was really eye-opening for me to basically learn how to put together a business case once and be like, oh, so that cluster that nobody really likes, it needs an upgrade, it's going to cost that much money, and here's why, and here's the performance gain that we will get, these kind of things. And it was someone in finance who basically showed me how to do that, and it was a new experience for me, and I actually learned a lot from doing that, learning to basically not talk only in technical terms, to actually be able to translate things so that things make sense business-wise.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I mean, it was the same for us, like with in interacting with our recruiting team, where we had like maybe 20 or 30 just really, we had phone screens or on-site candidates, and it didn't work out, or there was like a missing gap, or one of those things, like when we looked at their resume, we're like, well, this is maybe a red flag on the resume or something. And so partnering like closer with the recruiting group, sitting with them, having them sit with us, and just kind of back and forthing, really helped us like figure out how to find the right profile that we wanted to hire for, and go for that. And I think the other key thing for us was we ended up putting together, I think, a script of questions like, hey, recruiting team, here's a list of questions you can ask anyone that you do the initial phone call with, and based on their, like, here are all the kind of high-level answers you could expect to see, and that allows you to stack rank them as like kind of junior, senior, staff level, and that'll help shape our perspective on what we should be asking them when we do a technical screen. And then other things like when we were hiring, like probably a couple months back, we were looking very distinctly for, we wanted a senior MySQL person, like someone who has done MySQL for 5+ years. One of the things that we ended up having to do was say, if MySQL is at the end of a comma-separated list on the resume, don't send them our way, because it's probably the afterthought at that company. It was kind of the problem at a lot of the time. Like we really needed someone who we could say, here is a Linux infrastructure with hundreds of MySQL machines. You need to just work in this. And not, we don't have time for you to learn. We have time for you to learn other stuff, but like we need you to be able to just fall into the on-call rotation pretty quickly. And then once we got out of that kind of red zone, then it was like, okay, now we can grow, people, or we can look a little more broadly and see what else we can find. But yeah, and so there's a lot of commentary going on in a chat room right now talking about salespeople. And
we are great friends with our account managers. We have technical account managers for our high volume customers, and I guess I don't think they actually report to sales like in the org chart. It's not that way, but it's an important relationship to have, not just for me specifically as a DBA, but also just overall in our product ops team, because it's important to know what are the pain points they're seeing that might not be making it all the way to ops very easily.
Yep. The day you learn that that maybe 5-second outage that happened when you ran a bad statement on a production master caused some demo to fail that a salesperson was doing, and now a lead has been lost. Things like that.
Yep.
Completely crazy. But then you realize, okay, we just need to make the application better. It's not a database problem.
Actually, going back a little bit, Jeff, you talked about growing the team from internally and hiring. What's kind of the balance with you guys? I mean, if it were up to me, I'd love to just grow people internally rather than hire externally.
So, I mean, the absolute easy answer is hiring someone externally who has a skill set is always going to be, I'm going to put in quotes, easier. They're going to bring a fresh perspective. They're probably more seasoned. They'll be able to hit your on-call rotation pretty quickly. And so overall, that's just really, like, that is like ideal case. When you're hiring, that's like the one you always look for. But the problem is, and Patrick touched on this earlier, sometimes it's just really hard to find that. Sometimes you have to wait until people have been at their current company for 4 years to vest all their stock before they're ready to move. At least that's the problem in Silicon Valley. Like, so that's kind of where things are sometimes. And so I think it's keeping that fresh perspective of, well, if you have someone internal, maybe they're more junior, maybe they're on a sysadmin group, or in our case, the NOC team, they have enough experience to like get around a system, and just start by just feeding them some material. Like, try out this thing where you set up MySQL Sandbox. Try this thing where you set up master and read replicas and replication, and learning how all that works. And just kind of give them some small filler work to just kind of get their feet wet. I think one of my favorites is write a URL shortener website that runs on MySQL. That's a pretty easy small stack app to learn and kind of get your feet wet with, in our case, learn a little bit of PHP so you're familiar with the syntax, and learn how to set up MySQL. Okay, now what happens if I kill your database? How does it handle that? And so just small things like that, being able to think about it. And the reason I like URL shortener is because it's a great example of, okay, you have it in a relational database, now put it in HBase, and that is still very doable and pretty easy to transfer. And so that's kind of the high level. And so our team composition right now, at least where I am, we've only converted one internal hire so far, and everyone else has come externally or grown over time. But I think that's like, converting internal folks is just a lot easier because they know the environment at large. They know about probably the applications that live in your environment. They're already roughly familiar with the architecture. And so the only thing you need to do is, here's the gotchas when you do setting up replication with databases. Here's the gotchas with doing schema migrations, and just kind of like grow that over time. And so I actually did talk on this 2 years ago. And it's something as simple as like an external person, if you can land that and you can secure that, you'll have them in on-call within a month maybe, and you'll be good to go, and they'll be successful pretty quickly. An internal hire that you have to train up, maybe there's going to be a 3-month lead time before you get them into the on-call rotation, but they're already familiar with all the environment. They're bringing potentially a different perspective. Like if you hire a sysadmin, they might bring more systems knowledge that your team doesn't currently have. If you convert someone from an engineering team, maybe they have stronger programming chops than the other folks on your team. And these are all like, it's good to get all that mix kind of throw in. Because when you're just thinking, I want to hire a DBA, and you go out into crawling through resumes and stuff, and you're looking for someone with these database skills, you might be missing out on some other knowledge or technical stack expertise because you're like, I want a MySQL DBA that knows these things. And maybe you'll be like, oh, they need to have 10 years experience and have programmed a little bit and be good at automation. Whereas maybe you have a developer who has been programming for 10 years, and if you just teach them enough to be successful with MySQL, they'll write like maybe some beautifully unit-tested code, have a very different perspective on distributed systems management and programming, things like that.
Right. The only thing,
long-winded answer.
You have to invest more time in it. But
yeah, I was gonna bring that up. Like, training up from the inside is also my favorite, but that's not the road we went because it would have been unfair to think that we were gonna do that and actually get someone trained up on it when I was already so short on time.
Yeah, and I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I think maybe like after another couple quarters, we'll think about that, and we have a great SRE team, and there's a lot of people in there that are already familiar with all sorts of different like junior DBA tasks, and I sort of try to document things for them so that the simpler things are actually documented. They can do them on their own. But yeah, it would have been unfair on my end to say, okay, we're going to hire from within and basically groom someone if I knew that if I just won't have the time to mentor or really like pair with them on things, because it would require a lot of time to pair, and that's a huge investment up front.
Yeah, and I totally get that, and that's why I think the reason it became extremely important for us was we had been trying to hire for over a year with no luck. Like every person, when we did get interviews, there was always a red flag or something that kind of got stuck, and that's when we said, okay, well, while we're trying to hire, there's this person on another team, they seem interested, let's feed them some material just to kind of see if they're more interested, and eventually it was like, okay, let's bring them in, and we'll accept that, we're going to have to push back on some other stuff that needs to happen and focus on that. I mean, obviously, if your hair is on fire 24/7, maybe this is not going to happen, but that's when you get to a point of maybe your engineering group is going to like step in and help out as well, or other folks on your operations team. So yeah. I guess anything else about onboarding?
Oh, so I was actually going to bring up the fact about looking at resumes. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think all the DBAs I know never started off wanting to be a DBA. They kind of accidental into being a database administrator. And like I was a junior systems administrator that applied for a junior system. And during the interview, the hiring manager was like, "Do you like databases?" I'm like, "I know a little bit." And then I got hired as a junior database administrator. And so but like what Jeff was saying, it makes sense to look at not people that don't have DBA in their role, like systems administrators and programmers that have some experience with databases could be really, really skilled database administrators.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious. Before everyone here became, fell into the role that you're in now, like, what did you want to do, or what were you doing?
I was a developer, and pretty much you concentrated more and more on databases. You kind of became the DBA within the development team, and slowly grew to be a DBA.
I was a sysadmin, and someone was asking why this app was so slow, so I learned how to create an index.
I'm a developer as well, and I was writing a system that had to use MySQL, and the needs of the system grew, and I just had to come up with growth solutions, so I became the de facto DBA.
You say with such sadness that I really feel.
I was the lone developer that knew databases.
Yeah, I was a junior. See, that was a quarters blow me.
Told you to pick the other beer.
Yeah, I was a fresh out of college junior developer and started getting my feet wet in backend scripts, and then one day a script that runs daily started taking 25, 26 hours to run. And that's when I learned that databases like memory, and there's a thing called the buffer pool.
This is interesting. So I focused on database administration while I was at school, but it was Oracle, heavy, super big Oracle. And when I was wrapping that up, all I could think was, I do not want to be in an operations role. I never want to be on a pager. That sounds terrible. So I was interviewing around for a back-end developer job at a lot of places, and a lot of those fell through. And eventually, I just caved and said, "Okay, I'll take this ops role, which is doing more sysadmin, which sounds more fun than databases, because databases, you just turn them on and they work. I mean, there's queries and execution plans and all that stuff, but I wasn't too interested in it beyond that, even though I spent a lot of time on it in school. And yeah, then this happened. So now I do a lot of MySQL and HBase and distributed stuff.
See, I did computer graphics and ray tracing at the university. At one point I did start to build a ray tracer in SQL just to see if I could, and I still want to finish that, but
because. In college, I started off doing high-performance, like super massive multi-threaded applications, and I actually did my end thesis on like high-performance GPU programming, and then I somehow got into ops. It just happens over time.
This is turning into a support group now, isn't it?
hey! It's totally okay. No, it's always. I absolutely love hearing these origins.
The drinking has already started, so yeah, that ship has sailed.
So we stay here an hour after the hangout ends, right? The real therapy begins.
No, that's what conferences are for. That's where the real therapy happens.
Do I have to start coming to MySQL conferences too now?
You do.
Oh boy.
For sure, man. You should go to a MySQL conference and talk about Postgres for the MySQL DBA.
Actually, that's a good point.
who was here at the MySQL conference 2011 in Santa Clara. It was.
That was my first.
It was sponsored. Do you remember who sponsored it? None other than Postgres and Enterprise DB. This was the hybrid MySQL Postgres conference. It was really hilarious.
Oh, wait, yes, and I think I got a Postgres SQL shirt from that because they were the only ones handing shirts out.
I'm starting to think we're missing Barrett in this conversation.
Okay. I was hoping to see if we could kind of keep going for a couple minutes because we've got about a little less than 10 minutes left. Because I didn't know if it was enough time to dive into the other high-level topic I had, which is like new tech. But maybe we can just touch on that at a high level. Hot new tech that you've been looking at, things that you might be interested in. I mean, I'll just throw out there. I started poking around Docker recently. There's an initiative to look at Docker as an infrastructure component. So this isn't for work. I just went home. I'm like, well, I guess I'll try running Docker and see what this is about. Containers are apparently the future. So,
Let me tell you, here in the Netherlands, Docker is the hot thing, right? If you go to a Docker meetup, there could be up to 1,000 people. Amazon CDO was here the other day. There were less than 100 people registered to this meetup. So all the buzz is about Docker.
There's a yearly conference that happens in Vancouver. It's an unconference, and one person suggested a topic of Docker, and so a lot of people went to it. And this was last year. This year? No, this was this year. So the person was like, "Who here's excited about Docker?" Many hands goes up. Who here's actually running it in production? One hand. Apparently, Vancouver is not the hotbed of next generation technology.
Yeah, I know we're looking at it. Company as well.
So Docker has actually become the official way that Postgres distributes alphas now for testing. Is that it's not the official way, but it's the way Josh Perkis, one of the core developers, makes a Docker container for every alpha release and says, "Hey, just test this." And it's actually super great with the community because on my server, my test server, I can just install the new, complete build of Postgres and just throw my tests at it. And I think it's been pretty handy.
Yeah, and that's the part I'm more curious about, because I know Mark Leith had talked a little bit about how they're starting to package MySQL Docker containers for people to test with. And I mean, when I first talked to some of the folks on, we have a group that is iterating on Docker as an infrastructure component, and figuring out how that's going to look with Puppet. Does it replace it? Does Puppet put Docker there? Do we run Puppet in Docker? All that kind of mess. But how is this going to look for, the idea is for our developers to have an easier way for them to package the applications they're building, and more rapidly be able to package them and distribute them and all that. But the flip side is, what's this look like for, I almost want to, for people who manage stateful services? I mean, originally it was you couldn't really safely run a stateful service in a Docker container because when they're done running, they go away. You can demonize them, but then there's kind of questions there. How do you mount local storage? I mean, with Docker, you can set up volumes that kind of point to a local mount point or a directory. So then it's taken into account now, okay, what are the performance considerations, because you're adding a layer of abstraction, how's that look? All things that I'm I'm literally just poking around at this just to start seeing what it's like. I mean, I can see obvious wins around, deploying applications and clients. It seems like a really great thing, but for managing stateful services, at least in the current aspect, it seems a little more challenging.
Yeah, we're looking at it too, and I've actually deployed not databases with it, but we've moved a lot of stuff to Kronos as opposed to just random box out there that's running crons, and then when it dies, nobody knows what was on it. So that was my way of getting into a little more familiarity with Docker without putting databases on it, because I already knew this was 6-9 months ago, so I already knew that it was not ready at all for stateful services. but I needed to at least understand how it works so that if there's applications that are Dockerized talking to a database, it's easy to understand like what is the interaction that's going on there. Things that have been built on top of using Docker as the unit of runtime has been very interesting. Kronos has been very useful. Mesos, we also run a couple of applications through that now. We're talking about what else we'll do there, whether we'll move more services into Mesos or even like switch to Kubernetes or something like that. But it's definitely really useful for ephemeral things, and it's been really useful at putting crons that are not belonging to a single box. I think as far as other tech that I'm interested in and hoping to have time to play with soon, things like service discovery, like true service discovery, not the like I do things with chef roles that shouldn't really be chef roles, where if you have proper service discovery where you go, this particular attribute can only be one box in a cluster. There's a lot of things that could be simplified in the things we do as DBAs that would benefit a lot from a robust service discovery layer. And other data stores. I took some time to learn about Riak a while ago. I'm probably going to be learning about Cassandra at some point because we're kind of thinking about it for a few things. It's nice to keep an open mind.
Yeah, and I mean, so what else are other folks looking at? Yeah, I mean, service discovery is definitely another hot one. I was going to ask, Sylvia, are you looking at console or something else?
We're thinking console. I don't think we've actually, like, as a team, decided what we're gonna test out. It takes a while to get something like this into your infrastructure, and we're in the middle of a handful of very large projects right now. So to even talk about it would be a little premature. I'm thinking probably later this next quarter or even beginning of next year, when things will crystallize into something more than just me playing during dev days. Although my dev days have been also useful. I don't know if Shlomi knows this, but our dev days, which are every couple of weeks, Orchestrator started out of one of those, and now my team lead is like, that's best tool ever. So sometimes good things come out of like one day heads down doing non-DBA things.
Forgot, Orchestrator is the new hot tech that we're testing out too.
Yay! It's official. I'm gonna mention you in my presentation next week. Yay.
Don't mention me. I'm not
awesome. Doing it. It's been. I mean, I'll say it right now again. It's just moving around a topology in preparation for a maintenance. I don't even have to go find Sensu, stash a bunch of boxes, and then forget to stash one of them. Stop slaves by hand. Start munging with all sorts of coordinates and all sorts of things like that. It's literally drag and drop, and it's the easiest thing. I can't wait to find some time between me and Madeline to put some hooks in there and actually use it for even larger maintenance. It'll be really cool.
Yep.
If you're going down the Docker route and you're not already familiar with this, it's a little bit old by this point, but there was a manifesto or something about 12-factor apps, about how to architect your architecture, or how to architect your application architecture for Heroku, which is just basically a container system. That you don't
that's ringing a bell, and that's true. Like we have not moved any existing services into Docker yet for that reason, because we're very aware of how what you do when you're planning to run it on a box and it's always alive is not the way you want to do it. If you're going to do it in a Docker, you're going to have to learn a lot of things.
Yeah, you really have to reduce your configuration scope. I had an app that I was moving to Puppet at some point, and due to the way he did things with Puppet at the time, the class declarations doesn't fit on my screen, and it was because those were all non-optional parameters that had to be there, and some of them were could be automatically changed. You can determine them because the production and staging systems did this, but this box over here did it differently, so you have to make it an option.
Yeah. Okay, I just realized we are actually out of time for this week, so I definitely want to bring up the new tech that people are messing with the next time, and I'm actually really thinking maybe we should have a quick kind of brief on Docker or a, like kind of a demo or a walkthrough of how to set it up and how to mess with it, and just kind of explain how the architecture works, because it is something that's out there that seems to be growing in popularity, and yeah, definitely a lot of people are looking at it now. But okay, yeah. So I guess thanks very much for everyone that made it today. Thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing you next time in I want to say 2 weeks. So until then, have a good time. Keep the world moving.
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.